In this video, I'm going to talk about matching evidence with the claim and a topic sentence of a paper. I'm also going to be talking about how you can use the purpose in the audience to help you decide whether you have the right piece of evidence. So we'll start with this image here. I've used this in other videos to talk about the structure of a paper. The one thing I don't like about this image is that each one of the main points signifies one block or one paragraph, whereas with your paper, it might be multiple paragraphs, multiple pages, multiple hundreds of pages if you're going out to a big book on a main point. The scope really dictates, the main point dictates the scope. It's not going to be a paragraph. You really can't develop anything in a paragraph. So let's start with an example here. Let's say that my topic is going to be about antibiotics in the farming industry. And one of the main points I want to develop is that non-therapeutic levels of antibiotics are ubiquitous in the United States farming industry. So I have a claim there, but I have to support that with evidence, and I have to realize that as I make this claim, I'm setting an expectation for my readers. I'm going to need to talk about the non-therapeutic levels of antibiotics. I'm going to have to talk about this idea of them being ubiquitous, or that they're all over the place, and I'm going to have to put it into a particular context, the United States farming industry. So those are the three things I want to keep in mind as we continue to plan out this section. Next, I want to think about my purpose. What am I trying to accomplish? I want to accomplish, I want to tell my audience that antibiotic use is widespread in U.S. farming. So right there I have a purpose, something to keep in mind. I also have a target audience. That will help me decide what is the kind of source I need to put into the paper, what features I need to consider about that kind of source. And I'm looking at the FDA in this case because they're the governing body for antibiotic use in the farming industry. They're already doing some work on this. They have a 5-year plan to foster antimicrobial stewardship in animal agriculture and veterinary settings, but I just think 5 years is too long. I want them to act a little bit quicker. They say they don't want to move quicker because they want to work with the interested parties. They want to work with the farmers, the drug companies, the regulators. They want to foster that sense of stewardship in people so that they value that selective use of antibiotics rather than just forcing them to change. So those are things I can keep in mind as I'm deciding what evidence to put into the paper and how I comment on that evidence. I'm going to talk about commenting on evidence in another video, but for now we'll just focus on this idea of matching the evidence with the claim. So I have my claim here. Non-therapeutic levels of antibiotics are ubiquitous in the United States farming industry. First, thinking about sources. There's not just one magic source. I know some students search around looking for that silver bullet source that's going to say exactly what they want to say. That might not happen. So you're going to be thinking about the main points. I've underlined them above. I'm just going to kind of run through a couple sources and talk about what to consider with these sources. I could find an article from a newspaper where a journalist discusses antibiotic use in farming in the U.S. So the first thing to think about here is that context matters. There will be plenty of articles out there about antibiotic use in farming in India and in Asia and some other countries. But this paper is not about those countries. This paper is about the United States because the FDA only regulates the United States. It doesn't regulate other countries. I might have a main point that brings in some sort of cross-cultural comparison. And in that case, I might look at other countries. But for this one here, it's only about the United States. So I can have that article maybe from USA Today or the Arizona Republic. They might cite scientists or doctors or people from the FDA or people from the farming industry. I might find those citations, put them in my paper. That could definitely work if I'm talking about this context of the United States part. So that's how I might find my way to support that part. I might find a research article in a journal to discuss the prevalence of antibiotic use in beef and pig farming in the U.S. Because I'm saying this is ubiquitous, that it's all over the place, but how do I quantify that? What do I begin to use to say it? Because it's hard to find that out. So maybe this article, this research article, it quantifies ubiquitous by looking at the sales to farmers. Since the farmers don't always disclose how they use the antibiotics or how much they administer, this research article kind of collects a bunch of research from other places, does maybe some survey results, a couple of other things, and they can kind of find out what it means to have this widespread use. I might find an article from an advocacy group on mistreatment of animals and packing pigs and cows into confined spaces. If we look at my main point here, I guess I could shoehorn that into there, but it's not really fitting what I'm trying to do here. Again, it might go somewhere else in the paper, this idea of really packed spaces, because that is one of the reasons why they use the antibiotics, because they want to kind of keep the animals healthy as they're maybe in these unhealthy environments. But that's not what I'm doing here. Maybe I can get to that with that non-therapeutic levels of antibiotics, but I would really want to think about what I was doing there. I'd also want to think about the kind of source. An advocacy group can be very biased. They all have kind of an agenda. Bias isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's something you can consider as you're putting sources into your paper. So on those pages, go to the About Us page and see what they're about, and then make your decision. Is that going to be a source that the FDA is going to be willing to listen to? If you want to take something from the PETA website, is that going to be a source the FDA is going to value as they're kind of weighing out whether to listen to you? Are you a credible voice or not? I'm not going to assess that for you now, but that's what I want you to be thinking about. You can also discuss how you feel about antibiotic use. A lot of students want to insert themselves in the paper as the evidence. You'll see I in the paper a lot. I isn't necessarily bad in the paper, but when you think about it in this way, as evidence, are you the best form of evidence? Do you work in the agricultural industry? If you do, maybe you are. If you work on a pig farm or a cattle farm and you see the use of antibiotics, by all means, you would be a credible voice. But you would just be one voice. If you look at some of the other sources up there, the newspaper articles bringing in multiple voices, the research articles bringing in multiple voices. So you would just be one. You probably wouldn't be the best source. I would ask you to take that out. So now we can look at what this looks like in the paper I've been talking to you about. And I've given you this paper to look at as an example, but it's not because I think it's a perfect paper. I think there's some stuff that we can work with. So the same topic sentence I had in that previous example. Now we're just going to look at what that looks like and how the evidence is integrated into the paper. So the first piece of evidence is really about antibiotics given to animals that aren't sick. So they're trying to get to that non-therapeutic part of it. It's not to keep them healthy. It's given to them when they are already healthy. So I'd want you to be thinking about that. On one level, it's talking about this non-therapeutic part, so that's good. I don't see much commentary here, so I think that might be a problem, but we'll assess that later. The next piece of evidence, it's really just looking at the FDA's efforts and concern over about the span of 30 years. Hey, that's pretty good. You're getting that information in there, but there's some other things you could probably be doing because they're not really getting to that idea of it being ubiquitous right here. This is really about the concern of the FDA over time. It could go somewhere else in the paper, but in this section, it really isn't advancing the agenda set out by any of these points that are right here. Maybe you can tie that back into lack of regulation, but that's not what this is talking about here. It's just talking about they've known this was a public health issue. Next, we get a quote about regulation in the pharmaceutical industry. Again, you're getting into this idea of regulation, but it's in the pharmaceutical industry. It could be tied in. It's just a matter of how you do it. So on that level, it could be a good source. It might just need to be integrated a little bit differently. And down here, we start getting to this idea of looking at healthy livestock and whether they need to be given it, and over 10 million pounds of antibiotics fed to poultry in the United States per year. So again, that's about that ubiquity. Maybe that's good, but this probably should be moved up a little bit. Maybe the ubiquity about this 10 million pounds of antibiotics and you get this administered to mostly healthy. That's probably better up here, or certainly before you get to the FDA's feelings about these things. So as you're making this revision to your paper and thinking about the evidence, I want to make sure you're thinking about matching the claim to the evidence, getting it into the right place in the section. There is no right way. You have to build a path through the section for your readers. But at this point, your job is to figure out if you have the right kind of evidence, if it's connected to the claim, if it's directly advancing the claim, and are you following through any expectation you set for your readers. If you are, you're doing a good job. If you aren't, you really should be focused on revision. Also, you should be thinking about the credibility of those sources, making sure you have the right kinds of information so that your readers are in the best position to take your ideas to heart and see what you and agree with what you have to say in the end.